Welcome to the July 27th Saturday morning meetup of the Coast Division. This week we have an exciting agenda. Greg Cassidy is joining us to talk about paintbrushes. I saw a clinic he did and thought it was really cool. Greg does some amazing modeling, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But first, we're going to do just a general update and talk a little bit about events, and then we'll close after Greg with a bit on coast modeling for anyone who wants to show what they've been modeling or have a discussion. Before we start, I wanted to talk about next Saturday, which is a week from today, April 3rd. We have a coast trip to the NMRA exhibit at the California State Railroad Museum in Sacramento. That will be for the day. If you want to take the train up, we are going to take the 742 Capital Corridor train up.
That says 724.
724. I'm sorry, it is 724.
Yeah, okay.
Arriving in Sacramento at 11:10 a.m. So that starts in San Jose at Reardon and goes all the way up. Quite frankly, my suggestion would be to go to Martinez and meet it at Martinez for two reasons. The cost is significantly lower in Martinez, and also the time is significantly less. It takes quite a while to get through the Bay Area. It takes about 2 hours to get to Martinez and about an hour to Sacramento from Martinez. If you pre-register, and I'll put the link in the chat for this meeting, it's also on the emails you got. They're Coast Extra emails. There's a link. If you click on that link and just register your name and that you're attending, you'll be on a list that'll get free access, free entrance to the CSRM museum. They do that as a courtesy to the NMRA because of the exhibit there. We'll have a tour of the NMRA exhibit with Charlie Getz at noon. Charlie, is an ex-president, past president of the NMRA. He and Bob Brown were the primary curators of the content of the exhibit. And it's actually a really interesting opportunity to have him go through and talk about all the items and where they came from. And, my epiphany was when I went through the exhibit the first time, I saw I think there are 7 or 9 brass steam engines and 9 painted steam engines on the wall. And I said, oh, brass and steam and painted steam engines. That's really interesting. When we went through with Charlie pointed out that those engines were actually plated with 24 karat gold. PFM apparently provided them. PFM, their Japanese contractor, as a way of saying thanks for doing business, would at the end of a run take the last locomotive and plate it in gold and send it to PFM. So there's actually $250,000 of gold plating on those 9 engines in the case. Yes. So I never, as a model railroad, I never would have read that description because I thought I understood what it was, because they sure look like brass until you look at them real closely. So anyways, it's an exciting opportunity and it's a fun day. You take the train up, it leaves around 11 from Martinez, around 10 from Martinez, get there about 11:10. It's a quarter of a mile walk from the train station over to the CSRM. The tour will be at noon, probably noon to 1-ish. Then you'll have some time to do some walking around the museum. There's a 2:55 and a 6:55 return train. What I normally have done is go to 6:55. The museum closes at 5. You can get dinner in Old Sacramento and then walk back over to the train station and catch the 6:55 train. So that's on August 3rd. Go ahead and plan on coming to that if you can. We also, yes.
The Martinez stop, what time will we meet there?
You have to go on Amtrak when you make the reservation. And by the way, if you don't do your reservation on Amtrak, do your reservation on the Capital Corridor website. If you go to the Capital Corridor website, you'll notice they have a code. And hang on a second, I'll tell you what the code is if I give me 2 seconds. The code is maybe I didn't put it in here. Anyway, there is a code. It's like V405 or something like that. And basically, when you come on the site, if you go to promotions, you put the code in, you can buy 2 adult tickets for the price of 1. So if you know somebody else who's going, get together, buy 2 adult tickets, not senior tickets. It doesn't work for seniors. The senior tickets are about $2 less, but if you buy 2 adult tickets, I think, each way they're about $16. So round trip, it's about $35. for a round trip to Sacramento and back for two people. So it works out pretty well. I think it leaves about 10. I think it leaves about 10 o'clock. The 7:24 train from Martinez. You can see it on the schedule when you make a reservation. So if you're interested, I'll put the link in the chat when I get done talking and Greg starts talking, and you can just click on the link and just put in your name and your email. I ask people to put in emails because one of the questions is, are you going to be on the train? And my intent is probably next week around Wednesday or Thursday to send an email to everybody who's going on the train to say, hey, you can get together, talk about which car you want to get in and how you want to do that. May be worth actually putting your phone number in so you can get phone numbers with chats about which car, because that's kind of the big question is if you meet everybody on the platform, it works out well. But if people have gotten on the train and you show up, you don't know which car to get on. So anyway,
Hey, Phil, the code is V405.
V405. So V405 will get you 2 adult tickets for the price of 1, and it's adult, not senior. So you have to put in adult. I tried senior and it didn't work. So, but it's well worth doing if if there are 2 of you that want to go together, somebody else who's going, buy your tickets together. Just 3 other event kind of notices for the rest of the year. We will have on August 10th, Chip Merriam's going to do a clinic on Saturday morning about amateur authorship and how to complete your AP for amateur authorship. So if you're interested in doing that or interested in doing some authoring, Chip's a great source for that. He's got a lot of good information. On September, I want to say it's 28th, but that may check me on the date. It may be 29th. It's at the end of September. We're scheduled at the South Bay Historical Railroad Society in Santa Clara. That'll be a Sunday event. We'll have clinics in the morning. Lunch will be provided, and then we will have in the afternoon some layouts open in the local area. And then December 8th, we will have an auction at the Alameda Senior Center. So that will be the next activity, and the next auction will actually be in December. So, and all that information again is in the Coast Extra. So if you go back and check the Coast Extra, go ahead and mark your calendars with the right dates. With that, I'd like to introduce Greg Cassidy. So I met Greg on New Tracks. He's one of the regulars on New Tracks and helps and does a number of things, including running what's called the My Build, which is a monthly time where modelers show what they've been building in their models. And Greg's always impressed me. He's an amazing modeler. The thing he does, he's in an interesting position because being in the East, he's around a lot of the small manufacturers and has developed quite a both reputation and a business building kits for manufacturers. So a lot of manufacturers, when you see their display models they have on their tables, Greg's actually the guy that's built a number of those. So, and he also does some amazing Halloween displays. So it's not just model railroading, it's other things. And Greg did this clinic on paintbrushes, and I've always found paintbrushes to be quite mysterious because I know I can walk into my local Michael's and buy a packet of 12 brushes for $9.99 with 20% off for $8. So the average cost of a brush is $6. But when I go to Blick, I see brushes that cost $20. And I have no idea about what the difference is in either use or in outcomes of why I would want to buy a $20 brush versus a 60-cent brush, and whether it's going to matter at all in my models. I thought Greg did a great job of kind of going through the basics of kind of paint and brushes. And so with that, I'm going to throw it over to Greg and let him inform us about brushes and what brushes are good for which kind of jobs and roles in model railroading. So Greg, over to you.
Thank you, Phil. You're very kind. And I will admit that the more I did research on brushes, the more I found out how little I know and how little I still know about them. There's so much to them that comes from outside the modeling world. Paintbrushes have been used going back to the great artists centuries ago. So what I found out was primarily what I needed to know to do my type of modeling. And I'll share that with you now. And if anyone has any questions or any information as I'm going along, feel free to just break in. You should be able to see my screen now.
Yes, all good.
Great. All right. Well, welcome to my clinic about paintbrushes. We'll be going over what brush options there are and how to care for them. I first gave this clinic on the New Tracks modeling show last month, and I was a little constrained on time then, so it's not a very long clinic, but at least I don't have to rush through it like I did then. I used to teach a course in community college about electronic page imposition for printing, but my students had to know how a bindery department worked before they could learn how to impose pages to be printed. So we spent the first week learning about bindery. We'll be doing the same here, so before we go into brushes, we'll cover a couple other subjects. The first is paint. What kind of paint will you be using? That can very much determine your brush choices. We can broadly classify paints into two types, water-based and solvent-based. All paints consist of at least three parts. Pigments, these are the finely ground particles that do not dissolve but are suspended in the paint. There are two types of pigments, prime pigments and extender pigments. Prime pigments are those that contribute to both wet and dry color in a paint. Extender pigments are lower cost pigments that give extra weight or bulk to the paint. Binders. These are ingredients that provide a binding effect that holds the pigments together to create a dry film on the surface. A paint's binder is the key ingredient that directly relates to a paint's performance, including adhesion, washability, fade resistance, or gloss retention. You can have oil-based binders and acrylic binders. The vehicle. This is the transport for the mix of the pigments and binders to travel from the bottle to your subject and then evaporate. These types of liquids differ depending on the type of paint. For oil-based and alkyd paints, the liquid is typically paint thinner or some other type of solvent. For acrylic paints, the liquid is usually, but not always, water. And additives. Some paints have additives for specific properties the manufacturer wants a paint to have. This applies less to model paint than some other types of paints. Paint is a liquid mixture of pigment and solvent. When dry, it forms a film-like layer. You can see here the ratios of the components of paint made up of pigments, binders, liquids, and additives. On the left is solvent paint, usually a half-and-half ratio. Waterborne paint on the right is made up of more vehicle and less pigment. Water-based acrylic paints have a water vehicle and both thin and clean up with water. Water-based acrylic paints are the most popular type of paint used by modelers nowadays. These paints are non-toxic, odorless, and dry very quickly, so you don't have to wait a long time between coats. There are painting techniques that are easier to do with acrylics, such as dry brushing. When using these paints, you can wash your brushes in water, so you don't need any special thinners to clean them with. Solvent-based acrylic paints. Several manufacturers of acrylic paint for modelers use an alcohol base or an acetone base instead of a water base. True Color and some Tamiya paints fall into these categories. As these solvents evaporate faster than water, these paints dry even quicker than water-based acrylics. The downside is that these paints are generally thinner, so give less coverage, and the solvent in the fresh paint can damage paint underneath that is not fully cured. But they do spray very nicely. Enamel paints were first designed for model kits and figures, making them a classic choice for hobbyists. These paints use an alkyd binder and acrylic resin to create a solvent with a petroleum base. Enamel paints have a strong vapor and smell, similar to lacquer paints. You'll want to use them in a well-ventilated area. Enamel paints are the longest drying paint of all these options. The enamel uses a unique curing process to create a chemical change, ensuring the paint dries into a durable, hard shell compared to other paint finishes. For decades, flocal paints were a fixture of model railroading. They were the only paints many used from the 60s until their virtual demise when the original formula was discontinued. To say the loss of flocal was significant to scale modeling would be an understatement. Because flocal had such unique qualities, it factored into many of the choices of how we went about constructing a model, mainly because it was durable and stuck to what you applied it to. You never had to worry about any type of masking material pulling it up, and it was impervious to all decal setting solutions. But for all its great qualities, flocal had its own set of issues. At the top of the list was the health hazard of inhaling the fumes. The main component in flocal was an organic compound known as xylene. Xylene was responsible for the characteristic smell of flocal. Xylene was also a small component of lacquer thinners of the day, and while you could thin flocal with lacquer thinner, the other components in lacquer thinner typically degraded the quality of the paint and ruined the shelf life, so you always wanted to thin with diasol. When painting with flocal, it was essential for your health to work with extremely good ventilation. Polyscale. Tester Corporation announced in May 2013 that it would discontinue its polyscale paint line, including its water-based acrylic paints, due to a changing modeling market. However, Tester continued to take orders from retailers and ship paint for a limited time. This paint is made with finely ground pigment and dries to a durable finish on plastic, resin, wood, and metal models. It can be brushed or airbrushed without obscuring surface details. Scale Coat 1 and Scale Coat 2 are specialized paints designed for use on different surfaces. Scale Coat 1 is formulated for use on brass, metal, and wood, while Scale Coat 2 is created specifically for plastic. Both paints dry to a high gloss finish, which allows decals to be applied directly without the need for a barrier. Scale Coat paints were available in both bottles and spray cans. Iron Horse Model Works is the new owner of Scale Coat. On their Facebook page, they say, "We are now the new home of Scale Coat model paint. The paint line will still be called Scale Coat, and nothing will change with the formulas of the paint." Oil paints. Oils and their less understood water-soluble cousins gouache are not a typical paint in modeling, but can be used for very effective weathering, rusting, and streaking. They can be simply applied and then streaked or spread around using mineral spirits, or plain water in the case of gouache. Washes can be made in their simplest form, but there are many specialized ones on the market. Again, these are primarily used for weathering, and in some cases just darkening a paint so it isn't quite as bright. Some are water-based and others are solvent-based, so be sure you know what you're getting and how to use it. Second, what material are you going to be painting on? Some materials like brushes, and some are better being sprayed. By sprayed, I mean either with an airbrush or a rattle can. Plastics. You want to wash them first to get off mold release. You should prime it first if using a brush. Spraying them often works better, but they can be brush painted. This largely depends on if you're painting a small detail or a whole boxcar or a building. Wood. This material loves to be brush painted. You can stain the wood before painting or afterward, or both. You don't need to prime unless you're painting a G-scale structure to be placed outside all year. Then treat it like you would if painting your house. Sometimes priming a wooden structure before painting it can lose some of the wood grain that is one of the calling cards of a wooden structure. Metal. Again, size can matter. For larger items such as a locomotive or a caboose, you'll want to prime and spray most likely. Smaller details like soft metal castings can be brush painted, but should be washed and primed first. Hydrocal. This is very absorbent and will take paints and stains well using a brush. Also, items such as Copic markers work very well with hydrocal. And resin. It can be similar to plastic, but is not the same. For small 3D painted items, wash and prime them first, and you can brush paint them very nicely. But for cast resin, it should be washed and primed, and it may be better being sprayed than brush painted. It really depends on the size and the detail. Okay, now we've made it to brushes. First and foremost, you need to choose the right brush for the job. The size and shape of the brush will depend on the size and shape of the area you want to paint, and also on the material sometimes. For small details and intricate parts, a fine-tip brush such as an O or double O is ideal. The smallest brush that I regularly use is a Winsor & Newton 4O. For larger items, a flat brush or a round brush with a bigger tip is more appropriate. For brush shapes, paintbrushes come in many different shapes and sizes. The shapes and sizes of the brushes you choose to work with will depend mainly on how large an item you want to work on, how detailed you want to get, and very often the type of paint that you're using. Flat shapes are great for covering large areas with paint. A few of the most common brushes in the flat family are flat shaders, filbert, angular shaders, and stroke brushes. Round brushes are my most common brush to paint with. Smaller ones are perfect for detail work, and larger ones for general coverage. They come in various shapes and sizes such as round, linear, and mop. And I'll add that when I'm applying stain, either a round brush or a flat brush will work depending on the area that I'm planning to cover. Specialty shapes are used for varying techniques. Brushes such as fan shape, dry brush, and stippling are just some of them. And there are some ultra specialty brushes on the market. There are many specialized brushes, such as these shown here. These are sold in nail salons for doing fingernail art. They also work well for eyes or bridles or any other fine detail work. Natural versus synthetic. Natural hairs are generally used for oil paint and watercolor paints and are more expensive. Synthetic brushes usually work better with acrylics. Depending on the quality of the hair used in natural brushes, they can be prone to damage and do not work as well with acrylic paint because the pH of acrylic paint is the opposite to that of the natural hairs. Synthetic brushes are cheaper and more durable than natural hair brushes. There are different qualities of synthetic hair. I like synthetic brushes from manufacturers such as Royal & Langnickel, Winsor & Newton, AK, and Army Painter. But I have a bunch of craft store brushes as well. One test to see if your brushes can hold their shape is to wet them and bend the ends. See on the right how some have popped right back up and others will stay bent until they're dry. I use those for applying stains where holding its shape doesn't usually matter. But a brush holding its shape can be a true testament to how good it's holding up. And usually you'll want one that can hold its shape if you're doing any fine detail work. It's important to have a range of sizes and shapes of brushes. Here you can see I have my Winsor & Newton 4O brushes for fine detail, some Army Painter dry brushes, some OK Craftsmart brushes for general use, some very nice Royal & Langnickel for better use, some really nice AK for really nice detail work, some really cheap craft store brushes for when it doesn't matter, and a mixed lot of really good to so-so brushes that I've collected over the years. When applying paint to your model, sometimes it can work better to use thin coats and build up the color gradually. This will help you achieve a more even finish and avoid any unsightly brush marks or streaks. It's also important to avoid applying too much pressure on the brush, as this can cause the paint to go on too thick and result in an uneven finish. And again, this will depend on the thickness or viscosity of the paint that you're working with. Thinning your paint with water or a paint thinner can help you achieve a smoother finish. It also allows the paint to flow better, making it easier to apply with a brush. Be careful not to over-thin your paint, as this can affect the color and the coverage. I like liquid flow aid. Water sometimes has too much surface tension. You can also see I like to use coffee lids for my palette. They're free and easy to throw away once they're completely covered. If every time you wash a brush, you leave a little bit of paint at the base of the bristles in that hard-to-reach bit near the ferrule, it'll gradually accumulate as dry paint, stiffen, and force the hairs apart. It's tedious to ensure all the paint is washed out thoroughly at the end of every painting session, but try to, because it'll really make your brushes last longer. I used to use a small bowl with a brush puck for rinsing, but I started using a rinse well, which I really like. Whatever you use, have it nearby and easy to keep clean water in. Having a sink near your workbench is handy as well. I'll often use Master's brush cleaner or Winsor & Newton cleaner, especially if I've loaded a lot of paint onto my brush. Sometimes that Winsor & Newton cleaner can get stuff out of a brush that I swore I had cleaned thoroughly. I don't know how it does it. Using soap and water, you can also clean your brushes. It's better than nothing. The tip of the handle is sturdier than the tip of the bristles. So if you want to store your brushes upright, put them into a container standing on their handles, not the bristles. And never leave your brush soaking brush down in anything. Try using a wet palette someday. It's a great tool for keeping your paint moist and workable, especially if you're mixing colors. It also helps to thin out your paint, making it easier to apply with a brush. You can either buy a wet palette, or you can make one yourself by placing a wet paper towel in a Tupperware and covering it with a piece of parchment paper. I use it most of the time when painting figures to get shading. And the beauty of having one that you can cover is if you've mixed a couple of colors together, but you're not finished using that mixture, it can keep it moist and you can sometimes get a couple of days out of it. Alternates to brushes. Copic markers are a brand of alcohol-based refillable markers with a fine and a broad brush at either end. An oil brusher is a modeling product made by Amomig that contains oil paint that's diluted to the right consistency and comes in a bottle with a brush attached to the cap. You can layer and thin these with mineral spirits, and they're excellent for weathering and rusting and streaking. A microbrush is a single-use tool with a small tip that can be used for precise application in a variety of settings. So what is the best paintbrush for modeling? Well, all of these. It's really about picking the right tool for the right job and keeping it in good shape. And that's the end of my presentation. If anyone has any questions.
Just one.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I found Vallejo makes a brush restorer that is an excellent product for using the acrylics.
Really? I'll have to look into some of that. I use a lot of Vallejo paint and some of their other texture products, but I haven't tried their brush restorer. It wouldn't hurt to keep some on hand. I could have used it years ago before I was actually doing the strict regime that I do nowadays with my brush cleaning. My brushes last a lot longer nowadays than they used to, but having a brush restorer on hand couldn't hurt.
Let's see, am I talking successfully here?
Yes.
Mr. Cassidy, I am the inheritor of a scrounge set of brushes. My wife's mother passed away and was a crafter, and so I have this whole collection of scrounge. I own no brushes of any stature whatsoever, and I have been trying to use them, and pretty much I start to use it and there's stray fibers and stuff. I just pitch it over my shoulder and keep going. But the thing that is plaguing me the most is I'm doing, let's say I have an O-scale caboose and I'm painting the underbody to get rid of the fact it's all bright red plastic. So I'm painting a lot, and the acrylic close to the ferrule starts to set up. Now, there's this thing where you have water and there's the nubs in the bottom. Is it to leave, if I'm not going to use a brush for a bit, just let it sit in the, it's suspended so it's not resting on the fibers?
Right.
Is that a valid way?
Similar to that. It has a spring on the top and holds them brushed down in water. And yeah, there's nothing wrong with leaving it sit in that. Two answers. The first, when you first are getting the paint on your brush, as much as you can avoid it, you want to avoid getting up into the ferrule area, because that's where it's so hard to get out of. Plus, as you're brushing on your model, whatever the surface is, that paint isn't going to get wicked up or sucked up and actually used. So it almost has a detrimental effect to the whole operation, because it's not helping you in your painting, and it's going to be harder to get out of there, especially if it starts to dry, as you say. Right. So as much as you can, try to keep the paint on the end of the brush, but don't load the paint on so much that it gets up into the ferrule.
Okay.
And as far as the brushes that you've inherited, you might have some good brushes in there. Ones that start to have stray hairs, I have a little pair of scissors, and if I have a brush that's still mostly usable, but a couple of strands have gone stray, I'll just clip them off.
Right.
Something else you can do, that Masters brush cleaner that I showed, it's almost like a very thin paste. And if you get your brush wet and rub it around in that, the paste adheres itself to the brush, and you can actually use your fingers to shape the brush, and then don't wash the stuff off, and it'll hold the brush in that shape. And the next time you go to use it, you want to wash that stuff off before you use it, but very often you might find that it's actually repaired the brush. And this brush restorer that Ken remarked on might be worth a try as well.
Okay. One other question regarding wicking of the paint. Somehow I have it in my pointed little head that if I start off when I'm getting ready to go, I wet the brush with water first, shake it off, squeeze it out, and then there's water wicked up near the ferrule to discourage the paint from wicking up there. Is that a valid approach?
It'll probably depend on the paint you're using and how you get the paint on the brush. If you're doing that and you're working with a somewhat thicker acrylic, if you just get it on the end of your brush, it's unlikely that very much of it is going to actually wick up into that water. If you're working with a thinner paint, it's probably more likely for that to happen. But on the other hand, if it's a thinner paint, it'll probably be easier to get it out of there.
All right. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Any other questions or comments?
Well, I want to thank you all for listening today. As I said, the more I researched brushes, the more I found out I don't know. And after my first clinic, I had a little bit more feedback that's sent me in another direction of finding out information about what's actually left when the paint dries or hardens or coalesces. And some of this goes back to if you're using an acrylic paint, once you're cleaning your brush, what's going down the drain is whatever vehicle was part of the paint, but also the pigments and the binders, which very often turn out to be microplastics in many senses. And in modeling, it's not really a big issue, but this was a discussion about interior house painting. And they did mention that if you have a septic tank type field or something and you wash out a lot of brushes, you could be putting a lot of plastic down the drain. Now, they didn't get into solvent paints or oil paints, but that's something that I've been spending more time looking into is what's left over once the paint has cured. What is it that's on the surface? If it's an enamel paint, obviously it's enamel left on the surface, which can be a very hard coating. If it's an acrylic, it's the binder is really what's left holding the pigment on the surface. And those binders, the formula for those is specific for each paint manufacturer, and it's hard to find out what it actually is. You will find some are more flexible than others. If you remember, there was a line called Model Flex that was out a number of years ago that proclaimed they had a little bit of flexibility in their binder, so it was less likely to show a crack if something moved. So that's my next area of research. And if I ever come up with anything usable on that, I'll let Phil know.
On Model Flex, I'm currently using Badger Model Flex. I don't know if that's the same Model Flex that you're referring to, though.
I think Badger bought it. It went through two permeations. It was AccuFlex and Model Flex, and I think Model Flex was first and AccuFlex was second, and I don't know if that's about the time Badger bought it. Okay. I don't see it much around here anymore. Some of the names like Vallejo and Mission Models have kind of pushed them out of the hobby shops around here. But I still have quite a few bottles of my old AccuFlex and Model Flex downstairs that I dip into every now and then if I can open the bottle.
Current production has a nice flip top, plastic flip top that seems to seal well and allows very good portion control when you're putting drops in to get a mix or something. I used Flowquill 20, 30 years ago, but yeah, the solvents never thrilled me to death. So I'm happy to go to acrylics, even though Phil and others here may remember a presentation that was done for us by a gentleman talking about painting, and he had a lot of experience with Flowquill, and we mentioned acrylics, and he just went, "Oh no, they're no good. You can't use acrylics." And we just sort of looked at him politely and goes, "Okay, sir." It just.
I am very familiar with that attitude, and in a sense, they're right. The shift over to acrylics was fraught with many trials, tribulations, and hardships coming from solvent-based paints, whether it was Flowquill or Polyscale or Scale Coat. And in their early stages, the acrylics were difficult to get to do what you wanted them to do. They're much better now. I think we can thank the military modelers and the role-playing game painters for that, because they've really driven the market of acrylic paints. And that's helped us all. And I think many of us have seen how you can learn so much from the military modelers and the role-playing modelers in their painting. And something that was a discussion in a previous show was our hobby. We have two segments of it. We have the model railroading part where we're playing with trains, running trains, building layout stuff. And then we have the modeling aspect of it where we're building stuff, which includes painting stuff. And many of us can fall somewhere on a scale between modelers and model railroaders. military modelers and role-playing modelers, they don't have the playing with trains part of it. All of their hobby revolves around building and painting. So that's their whole focus. And that's, I think, why they've driven the art of painting and airbrushing. They've done so many things with airbrushing and weathering, such as dry brushing and stuff, that all of us modelers can benefit from. But they live in a world of acrylics. You'll never see any of them going back to something like Flowquil or Scale Coat.
Yeah.
All right. Well, again, thank you, Phil, for inviting.
Absolutely, Greg. I think the one thing that we all need to recognize, I remember back in about 81, the auto industry went from basically spraying lacquer paints to having to use water-based paints, because what happened was there was so much emission from the factories from the paint curing that I know, for example, the Bay Area, with the Bay Area emissions, you could not spray lacquer paint anymore, because you were just basically, all the solvents you were spraying were going into the atmosphere. And so kind of uniformly, the whole auto industry had to go to water-based paints. And if you remember some of those early 80s cars where after about 10 or 15 years, all the paint started peeling on the top of the car, and that was because the water-based paint. So there was a huge, and water-based paints are by definition acrylics, right? So there was a huge amount of research in making acrylic paints more stable and longer lasting in the auto industry. And I think a lot of that carried over into other acrylic paints, and is why the acrylic paints of today are profoundly different. It wasn't just the modeling that changed it. It was that whole auto industry and going to water-based paints that made a major change, that you had to make water-based paints that were essentially equivalent when being sprayed on a car to the lacquer paints you had back in the 70s or before the 80s. So yeah, it's interesting. I think acrylic paints of today versus acrylic paints of 40 years ago are profoundly different things.
We had a 1987 minivan that within about 10 years lost all the paint off its little hood.
Yep. No, exactly. And again, they really worked very hard in the auto industry to resolve that set of issues. So anyway. So thanks, Greg. Really appreciate it. Absolutely a super introduction and kind of coverage of paintbrushes. It's for all of us modelers, I know we all probably have 2 or 3 cans with paintbrushes sitting in them, and hopefully now we'll take the time to sort them out and think about which paintbrushes to use versus just grabbing the first one that comes to mind. So well, with that, guys, thank Greg again.
Thank you,
and
Greg.
we will
Thank you.
big thumbs up from all of us. And what I'm going to do is just throw it open for folks to talk about their modeling. So anybody got anything exciting or interesting to talk about in terms of modeling? Just we'll go for anyone.
Is it okay for foul language to be used?
Oh, absolutely. Just nothing that could be considered sexist.
No. Well, this is in regards to a DCC thing, and you ever had it where you had a problem and you figured it out a few years ago, and now the problem is back and I can't remember the solution? I've posted some stuff on the groups IO for NCE DCC, and it's just, I've got a locomotive. I took out the urn skewering in an SW1500, and I thought, okay, I want to reduce the top speed to 75 scale miles an hour. So you have your configuration variables. And so I set the configuration variables, and the locomotive's response to throttle went to heck in a handbasket. Like, it speeds up, and then it super speeds up about halfway through. Then it comes to a dead stop. Then it goes backwards for a while at full speed. Then it stops and goes forward again at slow speed. Like, the speed table is shot to heck. And so I'm using JMRI to do the programming. And sometimes JMRI confuses decoders because it's going, fix this, bing, 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 do this, that. And I think things fall behind and it gets confused. But I'm going to try to go in and directly address CV2 and set it, and then try the locomotive and directly set CV5 and try it again and see whether that fixes the problem. Because as soon as I take the locomotive decoder and do a factory reset, the blankety blank thing works fine. It's like, what the? I take it out of the locomotive, which is a whole job in itself, and put it on my little test decoder tester, and it works fine with you know, the default factory default. But as soon as I try again with NMRA to set CV2, 5, and 6, it goes to hell in a handbasket again. And it's like, what's going on? And I thought years ago I had this figured out, but now it's not. So that's my one thing. The other thing I'm doing, this is a new O-scale wheel set from Atlas. And the thing that's of interest is that copper colored gear that's on the axle. I've pulled one of the O-scale wheels, the three-wheel wheels. I've got it off using my NWSL puller because I made a mistake. And I'm primarily an HO guy. And you have your nice little HO lubricants. And your HO lubricants are not the same as like the equipment Joyce uses in her locomotives, big, heavy machinery. But even O-scale counts as big, heavy machinery compared to HO. So I used my HO gear lubricant when I tore down my O-scale RSD 715. And we ran it at the Alameda County Central Railroad Club show for this run of the Alameda County Fair. What was that, Phil? 4 weeks?
18 days.
18 days of hard running. So I tore it down afterwards to clean and lubricate, and this gear was chewed to death because the lubricant could not handle the loading, the amount of force that's applied by those big O-scale motors. So after a whole lot of back and forth, I got the good people, Bill Saratelli, bless his heart, at Atlas, found me a part where I could tear these three-rail things, tear them apart, get the gear so I can put it in mine. And by the way, Phil, the club RSD 715 may also need these gears replaced, which I will undertake. I'll have to take it home, tear it apart, and see. But it's just shifting from one scale to another. The mechanical requirements can change radically. I have no idea, for example, for Joyce with the Garden Railway equipment, about maintaining that stuff with its even greater weight and forces, about what's the right way to clean, lubricate the drive systems. It's something, one of those food for thought things. But I'm currently just trying to get this fixed in my unit. Fortunately, the gears that come down off the two motors in this thing are steel, and they took no wear. Which would have been even harder to replace, but thank goodness they didn't take the wear. It's the axle spur gear. So that's the sort of stuff I'm currently saying bad words about. Who's next?
Well, Mr. Gibbons, if you all don't mind me joining in with your discussion.
Absolutely.
Your first remarks on coming back to DCC after a couple of years just made me laugh, because I built my layout in the mid-90s, and I put in one of the earliest systems of Digitrax back then. And obviously I was 30 years younger, and reading about it, learning about it, and understanding it seemed easy at the time. And I got the system set up. I had roughly 20 locomotives, and we're talking HO scale, that I put decoders in back when you had to solder everything, and there was before there was sound. And I played with the CVs a little bit on my programming track and everything. Well, then I did a bad thing. I took a 10-year hiatus because of this stupid race car that I had. And about 6 years ago, I came back into model railroading, and my system didn't work. My trains wouldn't run, even if I cleaned the track. I traced it down to one of the boosters had gone bad, I didn't trace it down. One of my friends came over and traced it down. And we ended up replacing my 30-year-old Digitrax system with what is now about a 5-year-old Digitrax system. But I couldn't remember how to turn the darn thing on. And especially with the Digitrax, their new handheld throttles have so many buttons on them. I had to have the same friend come over and say, Tom, how do I start this up and get it running? And he went through all the steps. I took notes and I said, I used to know that, but I'd forgotten it. And I'm now at the stage where I got the layout running. I actually had to because we were having a layout tour last weekend. But I found some of my locomotives weren't responding the way that either I remember them or certainly not the way I wanted them to. And I started looking at that and saying, there is no way I can remember how I went in and changed those CVs before, what acted on what. And if I tried to go through the manual now, I'm not sure if I would actually comprehend it the way I did 30 years ago. So I'm going to take them to my friend who knows about this and have him go through all of that. So my recommendation is find a good friend who knows a lot about that.
I take your point, but with 50 years of experience working in tech and in electronics, I cannot just out of pride abandon. I'll ask for people's comments or ideas, but I've been hammering tongs a lot of stuff. But there's one other thing about this, Greg, that I'll mention. This Atlas RC715 O scale unit that I had came off eBay, but it had a, God help us, ESG, what is it? The German company that does the loco sound. It has, I think there's over 1,000 configuration variables in it. And I have no interest. When I start to look at them and try to deal with these fancy sound things, I lobotomized this locomotive here last week. I tore out the entirety of that lousy, complicated, overcomplicated bells and whistles decoder. I put in a stupid, simple NCE decoder that has no sound. I can understand it. I can program it. And I don't want, I do electronics in this hobby to make the trains run. It's not a hobby for me. It isn't entertaining for me. I don't know about the rest of you guys, but I want to run trains. I don't want to sit there cursing and grumbling as I've been currently doing, trying to get a stupid little $35 decoder to just go forward and backward the way I want. So
I know exactly what you mean. I don't know electronics. I do not want to make electronics a hobby. I just want the trains to run the way that I want them to run. And even that is secondary to my modeling, which is why it sat for so long being unused. Fortunately, I have a couple of friends who understanding these electronics and playing with them is their hobby. So I can call on them, and I don't have any stature that I need to worry about. They know I'm an electronic dummy.
Well, Phil Edholm here and myself are part of a team of people that are,
One
take
thing
it away.
If you're thinking about switching to Blue NAMI, I got the manuals just so I could sort of look at it and see how it was working, because I using Wi-Fi, local Wi-Fi right now. But the thing was 70 pages long of CV settings. And I said, hell, why am I doing that? I'm deaf. I can't hear them anyway.
Yeah, it's insane. The amount of documentation that comes with this high-end stuff. You have to go online because they're books. But I was going to say that Phil Edholm and I are dealing with the electronics involved in the DCC installation down in Pleasanton, California at the O-scale layout at the club there. And it keeps both of us just real entertained trying to figure out why the voltage is slightly down in a certain block. And it's just, it's not fun. It's hard work. Would you say that, Phil?
Yeah, well, I think going back to these issues with DCC, when you program it, you're programming it from a profile that's built into JMRI. And I always wonder if somebody makes a mistake in that, if it causes an issue with the programming. We had a huge issue. This was actually driven by having very long cables, which in O scale create all sorts of interesting things because of the current demand. But we had one block that had about probably 110 feet from the booster to the block. And we had a perpetual thing where engines would all of a sudden start, the horn would go off and you couldn't turn the horn off. And the only way you could do it was to reset the decoder and then reload the profile off of GMRI. And then we ended up finding with the lock sound decoders that the engines would actually lose their mind. And actually, David came out with a scope and we found out that the lock sound 4 amp O scale decoders were generating so much noise from the PWM circuit that when you put it on 110 feet of wire, it had so much noise that it actually confused the underlying DCC data signal. And actually turned out that there was so much noise that even after you got out of that block and got back into a block that was only 10 feet away from the booster, there was still so much noise you could not reestablish the I pattern. The I pattern is when you have a digital system, wireless, as your phone, anything, it has to create a pattern where it figures out the time domain when the signal is going up and down. So the I pattern is basically a width and a height thing. And it figures out, oh, this is the point where I should say it went from a 1 to a 0. It has to figure that out. And if you don't have that out of the wireless signal, you can't decode the digital message in the signal. And so there's all sorts of weirdness in DCC that is there depending upon your combination of booster, wiring, and decoder. So it's kind of, it's so interesting. I think, Greg, you made a very interesting point, and I find this very interesting about why people got into model railroading. And it strikes me there are two kinds of model railroaders. There are folks that got into model railroading because they were interested in trains. And model railroading was a way to insatiate your interest in trains. There were people who were primarily interested in modeling, and model railroading was a way to build great animated models. And what's interesting about DCC is it's actually at that intersection. If you did a Venn diagram of that, the place where we all have to exist is in how do you make the models move. So DCC is kind of that thing that everybody has to deal with, but a lot of us are not very well positioned to deal with. So I think you get help in that. Fran's on here, so I can say, I think I saw Fran was on here. I don't know if he's left. He was here earlier.
Yeah,
oh yeah, there he is. Fran's here. Like I can say, it's kind of like your comment about, I don't do DCC. I have friends who do DCC. I kind of say the same thing about doing resin printing. If I really need something resin printed, I have a friend, Fran, who can help me resin print it versus me trying to do it myself. Because sometimes just getting the knowledge base to be effective, because we all have limited time, and it's where do you spend your time? And sometimes it's a lot better to ask your friends who have spent the time getting the knowledge to say, don't try to train me. I don't want to become I don't want to become a fisherman. I just want to fish for today. I think it's actually very admirable as a group is we all know where we have strengths. I mean, Greg's strengths obviously is in building structures and painting them and understanding that and taking advantage of that versus trying to learn everything. So I think you're 100% correct. Lean on your friends.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Well, you looking back, most of us came into this hobby with, quite a while ago, and it was regular, fun, interesting, educational to go from artistic to general technology to go all through all these things that are this hobby now. In the last 15, 20 years, that there's technology has poured into model railroading so much that, how much do you really want? Collaboration. I'm all about collaboration. If anybody wants to talk about it, I don't want to paint and weather my models anymore. Yet I'm, getting models out faster than I can paint them. And I'm working with Stan Shields right now with. He's going to do some painting for me, and I'm doing some printing for him. But technology is poured into this field, and if you can keep up with it and do all of that, do the artistic stuff and the modules or scenery and all that, more power to you. Please enjoy while you're doing it, because it can burn you right out.
Fran,
Well, I think, Fran,
thing about this group, is this the kind of group where you can sort of put together collaborations? And I think that for us, in some cases slightly demented, myself these days, need a lot of extra help from other people in doing some very specific little things that we would used to do by ourselves or didn't need to do in our earlier modeling. And it's just that the group should be a place where that type of interaction happens. I know I've had some great stuff with Dave in the past, and I mean, he's the soldering guru of gurus.
well, Ken, I think you're right. One of the great things about collaborating that Fran brought up about stuff that you maybe don't want to have to do or learn about is if you can find someone who is enthusiastic in that, they probably know a lot about it because it interests them. I know a lot about kits and building structures and painting and stuff like that because it interests me. Electronics does not interest me. So anything that I have to learn in that, I'm almost doing under duress, as opposed to my friends where the electronics are a passion of theirs. It's their hobby. And so they enjoy learning about it. And that's why I don't mind calling on their expertise. It's something I don't want to have to develop, and they develop it because of their love of it.
Exactly.
Speaking of collaboration, I am going to be, as we move into the winter, starting to get my home layout going with operations. And if anybody's interested, you can give me your name or contact me to see if you want to be put on the list of folks who would like to be part of a crew for a small switching layout. It's not one of these monster 10,000 square foot layouts that have 25 operators. But I enjoy operations and learning more about it. So I'm looking for folks who are interested. I probably should post something, Phil, in the newsletter also.
Well, we probably, one of the things I need to talk to Seth about is if we should do some more stuff on our website around operations and that. So
yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Speaking about operations, I know Charlie, you had offered to help me with the Golden State Model Railroad Museum. It's not that we're not interested. It's just that I'm the one who's being a bit slow in setting up that meeting. So I'll probably give you a call this week and find out when you're available.
Sure. Be interested. Actually, I dropped a note to Seth just this week. I'd forgotten that he was in COVID, but I was actually, some of you guys may know Dave Parks's layout is being dismantled, right? That was an amazing place to go operate. And of course, Otis McGee is gone. And I started to think of all of the layouts that I've been operating on in the Bay Area. These are 60, 70 plus year old people. And I asked Seth, where are the 40-year-old guys, men or women, with operating layouts? Where's the next round of operating layouts coming from? And the answer is, sadly, he doesn't know of any. And that's actually a concern I've got, is because my my pull in the hobby is mostly operations, because I like the community and I like the fun and I like the challenge of operating. But yeah, I'm a little concerned about, we had a conversation, I think, a couple of meetings ago about the aging and the fact that those of us on this call are aging. But I know there are young people out there. They may not be coming to these events, but I'm wondering if there's some reason why people aren't getting into operating. Maybe they don't even know about it, the newer guys, and maybe part of our job is to increase that awareness.
Well, Charlie, I'm bringing my layout online, but I'm almost 70.
Yep.
So yeah.
And I think
So
part of the
I,
problem is the fact that housing prices around here are so big, so high that young people can't afford the houses that.
Well, that's
they're
exactly
renting.
right. That's exactly what
Yeah.
I was musing, is that who can
Mhm.
afford to have a
Yeah.
house with enough property to. Although I think about some of the more amazing layouts, like the Yosemite Valley, Burgess's layout is in a garage. You know, so if you can at least buy a house that has a 2-car garage, you've got an opportunity. But I haven't heard of anybody doing that.
Also,
Darling,
garden,
I represent
garden railways
Joyce?
have more.
Joyce,
extreme. I will spend 6 months on a freight car or a structure, and I'm happy doing that. I'm happier than running trains.
Yep.
Sure, I appreciate that. Joyce, you were saying?
The Garden Railway Society baggers, they have a lot more younger families, because outdoors, even if you have a small house, you usually have a little bit of land out, and you can put an outdoor railroad, even if it's a small one. And,
Sure.
you
Yeah, I've been
know,
operating at Ray Turner's. I don't know. I don't think I've seen some of you guys at Ray's, but Ray has an outdoor railroad for operating. He designed it to be operated. It's a great
operated
spot.
it. Yeah. But
Yeah,
I've
he's
been-
having an operating session tomorrow or today. Today's Saturday, right? Yeah, he's having one this evening. I can't make it, but that's great. But he's not a spring chicken either, right? So I'm wondering where the new. I'm a little concerned about where the new railroads are going to be coming from.
I would like to see more coordination between baggers and NMRA.
Sure.
I have tried in the past to get the two newsletters to give the newsletters to each other, and somehow that never happened. But you know, I think that there's a lot of overlap, and that's where the younger people are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think coming back to the whole idea of how people get to model railroading, right? They either come to it as modelers or as train enthusiasts. And if you look at operations, I would argue that folks that are in operations tend to be more train enthusiasts. And operations is a way of instantiating that train enthusiasm in what I'll call a gaming format. And you kind of start applying that to people under 40, and you start realizing how easy the Venn diagram is to lose people, right? So people under 40 have not been exposed to trains the same way people over 60 were exposed to trains when they were young. Most of us have memories of seeing trains operating close to where we lived. A lot of mall roads say, "Oh yeah, we live close to the tracks." I had an uncle who rode for the railroad. You go talk to people that are under 40, the odds of them seeing trains and being close to trains are less. And by the time you get to 30 and 20, it decreases, because railroads have basically receded from American life. They're an infrastructure element that's actually no different than electrical power generation and distribution. It's there, but you don't pay any attention to it. And then the other side of that is the idea of gaming. In many ways, operations is an intellectual form of
Simulation,
gaming.
yeah.
Simulation. And you look at the options there are for simulation in virtual online activities. We call it video games, but they are simulations in the same way. It's really easy to see why there's a very small percentage of younger people of the available population. The percentage that becomes interested in a model railroading and operations as a simulation activity is a much smaller percentage than it was in the 60 to 70-year-olds, because of the environment they grew up in and the options they had.
That's true. However, I will point out, when I've taken young people and had them, simulations are fun. I enjoy video games, all that's great. But I'll tell you, when you get in front of a 3D physical moving simulation, right? I mean, yes, it's in miniature, but it's physical, it's moving, especially if there's sound and so on. It is just, it's like taking that flat screen and turning it poof into a real world. And I think it's just a question of introducing them to it. I'm not convinced that the younger folks even know that this aspect of quote unquote simulation is even available to them. And I think some of our role can be to introduce the younger enthusiasts to what it's like to actually get in front of an operating railroad and operate it.
So that brings us to the interesting question, which is, if you have a layout and you're operating it, how often do you invite people that are not part of your kind of local operating group? And I will tell you that from my experience in this area, doesn't happen very much.
Yeah, that's maybe, and that's what I'm arguing. I think I try to get new people out all the time.
And that's really the challenge is how do you do that? So
I got a lot of people from both groups at my promontory party. So I think inviting, part of it is just inviting people. And I really feel it's important for the newsletters to share with each other. Unfortunately, I don't have the time to pursue trying to get that to happen like I tried some years ago right now. So if any of you know of who would be able to get the two newsletters to just share so that people can look at both alternatives, I think that's a really good way to because it's two different worlds right now, completely different worlds.
We don't, if I'm not mistaken, and I think that Charlie may speak to this. One second, Larry.
No,
we have open houses. We have open houses for the public where we simply run the trains for the public. But I don't think I've ever heard of an operations open house. And I don't even know if it's feasible.
Well, actually, to be fair, we don't do this enough, but you know, at the PCR event in the spring, we do PCR ops, right? And these are almost all new guys, right? So Dave Lovelace opened his railroad, or I remember Rick Fortin opened his railroad. I think Seth opens his railroad. And these are like op sessions, and these are, you know, new people. That's how I found where all the layouts were in the Bay Area, by going to PCR ops and signing up to operate layouts, right? So I think that's a great idea.
You're talking about at the convention.
Yes, at the convention. Yes.
Yeah, you know, I guess the other so there is another option, which is to ask. I would do this with Seth to potentially have one or two layouts available for operations when we do like the South Bay thing in September. Instead of having open houses, have open. The other thing that is, if someone's interested in operations, and I believe it's very much open house, open operations, whatever you want to call it, the Carquinez Club up in Crockett, I believe they do, and I don't know if it's every Saturday or if it's one Saturday a month. You can go to their website and see, but they have basically an operating Saturday, and I think anyone that shows up on an operating Saturday is invited to operate.
Yeah.
So that is a modern,
I think
that is a modern designed layout too, that lends itself to easy operations because it has such good access for people and moving around and stuff, so that it's one of the best layouts, I think, big club layouts for an operations, whether closed or open to guests. Next, Charlie, I think you got the floor.
Well, actually, now I'm disappointed because I had a paint question. I should have waited for Greg to stay on. I saw him disappear, but some of you guys may know. So I was given, I picked up a couple of models from a good friend of mine. He's an older guy who's been collecting Canadian National stuff, photos, and so on. George Carpenter, Phil, I think you remember George. But he has two models, RS10, RS18. These are Alco / Montreal Locomotive Works, MLW models. But there's from a company called Tiger Valley, which I had never heard of. And if I can, let me see. Let me share this photo. This is one of them, if you guys can see this. So this is a metal casting. You can see its age. It's about 30 or 40 years old. He'd like me to paint it for him. And from the instructions, which I was astonished to read, it says that the casting is 30% cadmium, 70% zinc. So again, I've never heard. Now I have some old Hobbytown models, that I don't think they're cadmium based, and cadmium and zinc. So I'm a little wondering, you can see the oxidization on it. So I'm wondering about, I do have thanks to Jack Burgess, I made myself a little sandblasting or air eraser kind of box. with some grit. I was trying to think what the right grit would be to use on this. I think aluminum oxide is the right grit. But I was wondering about what kind of paint to use. Like, I was thinking, should it be an acrylic? Should it be a lacquer-based paint? What will bond to this material? And also, since it's cadmium, I understand that cadmium's got a toxic nature to it. So I'm wondering if it's even safe to work with. Has anybody ever heard of these? And has any knowledge of the best way to deal with this kind of material?
My advice, I remember the company a long time ago advertising back in the 70s. But to answer your question, I think it's the quality and type of primer that you put on.
Yes, I was thinking of using metal. There's Tamiya has a metal primer. There's a Mr. Hobby that has a metal primer. That's what I was thinking. They're lacquer based.
But that will determine whatever you do for the other layers of paint. It's what's compatible with that primer and what will not interact or react to it.
Yeah. So I'm also not sure how soft this casting is. I guess I'm hoping that the airbrush or the air eraser doesn't end up pitting the metal. If it's super soft, it doesn't. In fact, George has a guy that normally paints his locomotives for him, guy up in Toronto that paints them. He refused to paint them, which is why he asked me if I would paint them for him. And he said, well, they'll warp. And I said, how does a metal casting warp? I've never heard of this before. So I just thought I'd ask and see if anybody has any other knowledge, because I'm kind of out of my league here.
The answer from the expert was there.
Yeah.
Shelf, and that's it.
I mean, I think one question is when you look at the oxidation, I would try, first seeing if you can do it with something other than the, trying to use, trying to do it with some sort of cleanser or something. And then I think that's the kind of thing you need an etching primer for, that actually etches and gets into it. So I would probably shoot it with that kind of a primer, and hopefully it'll come out okay.
Well, to not be too cynical, but George is a nice fellow, but he's in his, mid to late 80s, and he's said to himself, he's not going to be around much longer. So it's not like I have to make sure that he has a paint job that's going to last 30 years. Right. Most of his collection is brass. This is not. So,
Charlie?
Yes.
The simple thing to try first is take whatever cleanser or chemical action thing, I mean, vinegar, whatever it is, get your Q-tips and go on the inside of the casting first.
Right, and see what it does to the metal.
See what it does to the metal first before you hit the outside. That's the only caution I can think of.
Yeah, just try a few things and see what it does. Like I say, I had my Hobbytown, which I don't think are cadmium. I don't know. I assume they're just pot metal. Do anybody remember Hobbytown of Boston? Those things go back quite a ways, but those castings are metal. They took to the air eraser just fine. They cleaned up fine, and no, not an issue. So I don't know about this stuff, but I like your idea, Dave, of just trying some chemicals on the inside to see what it does. Also, it's got basically, you can create a whole range in different classes of RS10s, RS18s with these same so he's got like bags of different castings, and I'm thinking I might just pick one of those on the back of one of those castings and also try it and see what it does.
Just do the air eraser on the inside of the shell.
Exactly. I was thinking of that, and then see what will happen. Okay. And as far as painting, I think I'm with you, Phil. Now, I think I've done this before, but I'm just curious. You guys are more expert than I am on some of these things. I was thinking of using a lacquer paint to put down a primer, but then once that's cured, do acrylics on top. And the acrylics should bond to the lacquer paint, right? The lacquer primer. That should work fine, right?
Yep.
Okay, good.
It's not like they're going to attack it.
Well, no, I can't. It's not going to dissolve it. The only question I have is, I don't know about these binders, right? Binders have to adhere in some molecular way to the surface, right? And so the question was whether or not there's anything that would keep an acrylic binder from bonding to a surface that was lacquered.
Yeah, I was going to say
you just
this.
got to try it.
You just got to try it, yeah.
Restoration. at least drivetrains is their primary reason. I'm there, but you might go on that group and because a lot of the people there, they're dealing with stuff like Hobbytown and that earlier period thing.
Which group was that, Ken?
I'll have to look it up and I'll put a note to you on the ourgroups.io.
That's fine. I'm on there, so yeah, I'll see that. I appreciate that, Ken. That would be helpful. Thanks.
Just a thought that might be.
Yeah. Well, like I say, these things are heavy as hell. I'll tell you. When he gave me the 2 boxes with the parts, it was 5 pounds or something. 6. I mean, these things are incredible.
I remember back in the early 70s, there was a gentleman who was using depleted uranium for his N-scale model.
Well, I joke with Mark Schutzer. I thought he must be using depleted uranium in his SP steam locomotives, because those things, he's got these little 060s that will pull 30, 40 cars on them, and I swear he has depleted uranium in those things.
The thing I'm working with, this decoder problem I have, is an old Athearn SW1200 drive, but the shell is a all metal shell from Cary Locomotive Works.
I remember the name, but yeah, interesting.
And it'll pull 40 HO cars on the flat.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. But again, I've never asked what metals are in this metal shell and whether I've been consuming cadmium as I handled the shell when it was unpainted. I don't know. It may explain a lot about me. Why I'm now doing O scale with Phil and the other guys.
So just as this is kind of an FYI. As you guys know, I think I showed these based on actually being over at David's house at one point, and came up with the idea of a lighted uncoupling pick.
Oh yeah.
Yes. Those are now available on Seth's site. And they're available. You can either get them with a skewer, or they use a bamboo skewer, a number 16 tapestry needle, which is what Seth really prefers. Or for those of you that like a dental pick, they're available with a dental pick. And there's actually, I've got a video up. There's a video on Seth's site. I just put one up on YouTube about it, and it pretty much shows. I don't think I'll play it here. No real reason to, but so if you're interested, those are available up there on Seth's site now. So
cool.
It's very interesting. If you guys want me to play the video, it's about a minute and a half, 2 minutes.
Yeah,
let me do that.
Yeah, go ahead and play it.
And let me, if I can find it here. It's gonna take me a second. It's always the challenge of finding things in my file system, which is
challenging.
A challenge, yes. Let's put it that way.
I was actually involved in to some degree in this because I had come across something that was cruder than this from Micromark, and I went and said to Phil, "Hey, what could we?" And Phil came out with this excellent upgrade to the idea.
So anyway, I'll play this. This is basically the video that we put together, Seth and I, for this.
Introducing the Light Pick, the best uncoupling tool for model railroad operations. The challenge in uncoupling cars on a model railroad using traditional skewers or other tools is the ability to clearly see the coupler and to insert the tool into the precise position in the coupler to enable smooth uncoupling. The Light Pick solves this by providing accurate light right where it is needed. Even in dimly lit areas or where shadows between cars makes it hard to see the coupler, the Light Pick makes it easy to see the coupler and to insert the pick into the precise spot to optimize uncoupling. The Light Pick comes in 3 pick options with the 3D printed collar available in black or high visibility orange. The Light Pick includes an industrial-grade pocket flashlight that uses 2 AAA batteries that are included. The bamboo skewer Light Pick uses the popular bamboo skewer as the uncoupling pick. The skewer version of the light pick is designed to insert a skewer and hold it in place for uncoupling. The skewer can be replaced if it breaks or if it wears out. The length of the skewer can be adjusted by cutting it to the length desired. Another option is a number 16 tapestry needle as the uncoupling tool. This is Seth's personal favorite. The tapestry needle light pick is made with an extension to put the needle at the right distance for uncoupling. The dental pick version of the light pick incorporates a standard dental pick. The dental pick has graduated whiskers to fit into the coupler and make uncoupling easier. The light pick is made with an extension so the dental pick can reach the coupler. Many modelers swear by dental picks as the ideal uncoupling tool. In addition to uncoupling, the light pick can be used to illuminate car reporting numbers. This is especially valuable in tight spaces like yards. Buy your light pick at Model Railroad Control Systems. Use the QR code to order yours.
Anyway, that's
slick.
it.
Who did the narration, Phil?
It's actually Eric, who is, I think, voice number 37 of 150 on Voice Maker, which is I buy for $25 a year for a variety of uses.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, they've got these AI based speech engines now that do text to speech conversion. You can choose whichever one you want.
It was very good. It was very good, very natural. I liked it.
Yeah, no, it's pretty good. It's so yeah, that was the design of the light pick, so to speak, the operation of it. So yeah, if you're interested, like I said, it's on Seth's site. So see, I have one other thing which I am in the process of getting ready to do. So I'll share this and see if there's interest in me taking the time to document it and go through the process. So this is my train room. It doesn't look this way right now. It's actually torn up quite a bit, but this is kind of putting my modules in. It's a fairly reasonable space. It's about 17 by 19, 17 by 20 feet. It was a game room. Obviously, there was a pool table here. You can see the light from the pool table. See, this is kind of what it looks like. That's kind of one view. That's another view. This is what it looks like with the existing modules I have. So these are 2 6-foot modules. This is a single 6-foot module. This is a 4-foot module. And years ago, I built these kind of wings that are staging yards. So I've kind of got that set up today. I've been working on for the last, really since the convention, quite frankly, is putting lighting in. Because again, it's a 9-foot ceiling. I don't want to put anything drop down in the room. It just doesn't make sense to put in fascias and all that. So what I decided was, rather than doing track lighting, which I came to the conclusion was to be horribly expensive, I actually designed these 3D printed light system. So basically, this is a 3D printed light holder that holds a $3 5-watt LED 12-volt light. And then these are carriers that carry a number 12 and then 4 number 16 wires. So that gives me 4 lighting circuits. So hang on, I can zoom in here. I wanted to zoom in on, I don't know, I don't think I can zoom in. I don't know. It does give me zoom down here. So if I zoom in here, you can see basically what I've got is these are crimp-on connectors with crimp-ons on the wires. Then they plug together and they've got a bayonet connection in here. So you can see this light is connected to the first wire. This one's connected to the second wire. The third wire is used for some reverse fill lighting. And the fourth wire is for some blue lighting, which is for the overall layout. So, or for nighttime lighting. So this is basically what I'm building to. So those are the same modules. This is an existing module. This is an existing module. This is an existing module, with the intent to build 3 kind of fixed modules that'll stay in the room, with the idea these can be moved and taken out and taken to events for the ON30 group. And then I'm going to build a 5 rail a 5-track rotating, call it a train turntable. It kind of looked like a very wide ferry, but actually it'll sit down here with the idea that, you've got a yard, you've got a number of places to switch as you run around, and then you can end up with staging on this end for trains either coming out or going in. It also provides the lead for doing this switching down here, which goes down to the car float down here on the on Moss Landing. So what I'm actually just ready to embark on, because I had to get the lighting done first, is building this first module. So this is actually 98.5 inches, so it's a little larger than 96 inches by 4 feet this way. And so if you look at the module, this is actually designed for the track work on the module. I'm going to use all fast tracks. I've got the fast track jigs for number 5s and number 5Y, and I'll make the turnouts with fast tracks. What I'm looking to do is do 1/2-inch plywood, because there's not a lot of valleys in this, except for this red area that's cut out here. This actually drops down. It's about 2 inches lower in this area. So what I'm looking at doing is actually this side goes to a wall. This side goes to a wall. Using some 2x6s across here just for pure strength, so you can walk on this thing or jump on it if you want to. And then basically have some legs down here at this end, and then some 1x6s coming from the wall over here, and then again to some legs at this end. And one of the things that's kind of interesting about this is that because it's 98.5 inches, even if you take off the end plates, it's still 97 inches. So it's 1 inch longer than a sheet of plywood. So, one of the things I found is that if you, I blew that there. If you cut the plywood, basically a chunk out of the plywood at this angle, you can then slide it over and make it longer without really losing any rigidity or strength. So I guess the question I'm trying to figure out, is it worth going through some serious documentation of building this? Is anybody interested in kind of the steps and process to building that kind of a module, or is it worth the time?
It's always worth it, Phil, if you have the time, and perhaps if it increases the quality of your resultant project, because there's always issues you have to overcome that the rest of us will go, oh, Phil did it that way. That's how one way to do it.
Or don't do it that way.
And that's the other side of the coin, because it may be, it's like, that's very interesting, but it doesn't work for what I'm after, for example.
Yep. So anyway, that's the fall project, is to get that done. And actually the corner on the other side, I'm going to do at the same time. So building 2 relatively large modules that are going to be fixed in place.
You're going to be doing a lot of turnout construction, Sunshine.
Yeah,
the fast tracks jigs, though, if you do them in bulk, like, what I'll do is I'll cut them. I've got the jigs, so if I'm going to do a bunch of turnouts, do a bunch of frogs, do a bunch of point rails, do a bunch, right? Then now you've got the stack. Once you've got your stack of parts, right, which you can do pretty quickly, and I cheat. I have one of the little belt sanders, the desktop belt sander, right? I've got a 600 grit belt on it. And I don't even bother with the filing. I just put the rail into the filing jig, hold it against the belt for a few seconds, and it's done. So I can make the frogs, the point rails, the stock rails pretty quickly, build a stack of them, and then get out the soldering iron and solder them. And you know what? You can get them done in, you can get it done and glued to the tie strips in 45 minutes. Does it turn out? So in an evening, you can do quite a few turnouts. And once you've done, and by the way, they're fantastic. Compared to any commercial turnout, when you use the fast tracks jigs, they're smooth as silk.
You could probably
My 16-foot switching layout uses all fast track built turnouts, and they are very nice.
You can probably make a few turnouts to use as gondola loads.
Yes, exactly.
I agree 100%, Charlie, that what I find is if you do 3 at a time, in doing the frogs and points, you can do more of them. But if you just kind of do 3, plan on doing 3 in an evening, pretty easy to do 3 in an evening without getting to the point where you feel like it's becoming too worky.
Right.
Right.
So,
And I'll tell you,
So
when
I-
it's 30, it's 30, you're an O scale, right, Phil? So
Right.
what is an O scale, quality turnout? What are they, $50, $40 or something?
well, yeah, this is actually, this is ON30, so it's HO, but still, yeah, so I went and looked actually, because I was curious. The micro engineering number 5 code 83 ON30 turnout, they're pretty much $40 each.
Yeah, there you go.
And
Right.
so, if you need 9 turnouts, you're going to be sitting there looking at $360 versus, like I said, I already have the jigs, I have the rail, I think I have a lot of tie strips left. So, building 10 or, I think I have to build 9 turnouts total for that. There are 7 on this module, I think, and there are 2 on the corner module. And so, I figure that's probably 3 evenings. It's a lot between us. It's a lot less work than the lighting. The lighting ended up being a lot more work just when you went through the combination of the design and just printing everything and putting everything together and getting it all to work. It ends up being a lot more work. Like, for example, the connectors, you buy them, they're blue and yellow, and you have to spray paint them all white before you can install them. And after you install, you have to touch them up with acrylics. And so it ends up making it a lot more work. It works out the right, a lot more fun than other mechanisms.
Yeah.
Well,
Cool.
gentlemen, this is great. I have to run now. Thanks for getting Greg on for the clinic there, Phil. That was really interesting.
Absolutely.
Sure.
And by the way, if
Mhm.
anyone knows anyone that they'd like to do a clinic, send an email to them and to me and say, hey, why don't you come on Saturday and do a clinic? I've asked a bunch of the people to reprise their clinics from the convention. Larry knows that. He got an email about that. We have Chip coming in. Like I said, Chip will be here in 2 weeks. He does a clinic on amateur authorship, which is really cool if you're considering, going after some AP certificates, or if you just would like to do some publishing, talk to you about, how to do that. So, I think we can do some of those. That's fun. It's fun to have those. My goal, quite frankly, would be to have at least every 2 out of 3 of these meetings to have some sort of a clinic at them if we can. Just I think it's more fun. It's more fun and it's informational. It's informative for folks to come. And I guess the final thing I would say is, if you haven't signed up for next Saturday, sign up for next Saturday. Put your name in, get your name on there. The link for that, by the way, is in the chat. So if you click on that link and just put your name in there, that way you'll have to get the free admission to the museum, because I have to give Dave Putnam a list late next week. So with that, unless there's something else, I'll bid everybody adieu and have a great Saturday.
Great, thanks.
By the way, the one other thing is there is an open house this weekend in Danville. And I don't know, are you aware of that, Joyce? You probably are aware of the location and the address.
I'm sure I have it in an email. I don't, I haven't looked at it very closely. I've been really busy this week.
Hang on, let me pull this over. So I'll put this over, and so if anybody's interested, let me share my screen again. So I think this is generally an open to model railroaders. So this is Saturday and Sunday, July 27th and 28th, 10 to 11, and 181 Lowell Drive.
Let me look up that and see where it is, who that is.
Is this a large scale garden railway?
It's it's a garden layout. Yes, it's a garden layout. In fact, if you go down here,
there's some photos down below.
Yeah, there's a video here. You won't have, you probably don't have sound.
Oh, I know that house.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. Am I muted?
Yeah,
No,
No,
you're
you're
not
there. We
muted.
hear you.
Hey,
Yeah.
that house is amazing. I know that guy. He's just amazing. He has tons of money to throw at these things, and so he has made. Oh, this
It's Danville. Yeah.
he's a really cool guy.
Wow.
He's a
Oh,
medical
wow.
doctor, and he knows, and he's had really good people doing a lot of his work. It's in a huge, elaborate layout, and it's definitely worth going to. It's an amazing layout, just incredible.
The caboose. My God.
Well, I mean, take a look at the crossbars that he's got out in the street.
So anyway, the time frame is 10 to 5 today and tomorrow.
Oh,
And the address is 181 Lowell Drive in Danville. So I'll put that in the chat. I'll put that in the chat in case anyone's interested. Yeah, I just remembered that I had this. So like I said, I think one of those things that if you're out and about, it might be fun to stop by, even if you're not a Garden Railroad person. It looked like a really cool layout.
Yeah,
and the weather is reasonable right now.
Yeah.
The weather's cool. I gotta tell you, in Pleasanton right now, it's only supposed to get up to like 70 today. So today is a brilliant day to be outside.
There are a lot of really talented people in the Garden Railway layout group. Some really smart younger guys who are active in their tech knowledge is super up to date. They know all kinds of things that we don't know. So I really encourage any of you to look into that. The people in that group.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well,
cool. With that, I'm gonna bid everybody adieu. Have a actually, what I said, I didn't send this to everyone. Hang on. There we go.
Charlie,
181 Loyal Drive.
Yeah. Charlie,
Oh,
just
yeah.
let you know, I'm getting closer to actually reaching out to you and the other guys for an opening session.
That would be cool. You have my email, I think, right?
Yes. Yeah, I do.
Good. Yeah. Okay, dude. Excellent. Yeah.
Cool.
Looking forward to it.
Well, everybody have a great week. We will
Thanks.
see you in 2 weeks. Or actually, David will be responsible in 2 weeks because I'm going to be in LA, and I'm going to try to join at 10 o'clock from the National Train Show and let you guys see what the National Train Show. I'll try to do a little walk around there at 10 o'clock on Saturday, 2 weeks from now, because I'll be in LA, and I'm putting that on my agenda to do that day.
That's 10 August, right, Phil?
10 August. Yep.
Now,
August 10th.
we're a little bit fuzzy on 24 August, folks, because we have the Good Guy show in Pleasanton, and so I think we may have to shift that date. Phil and I need to talk about that.
Yeah, and I will be coming back from a cruise to Iceland, an Iceland cruise. So I will not be available that day, and David, may be out in Pleasanton. So we may actually just cancel the 24th and skip the 24th and go into September.
Considering everything that's going on at my end, Phil, I would prefer that.
Cool. Well, everybody have a great week, great couple of weeks, and we will see you in 2 weeks.
All right.
Thanks, Bill.
Bye now.
Ciao.
All right.